Subscribe to Film Companion for your film fix. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.
I mean, this is a situation no one expected would ever happen, let alone India, that the whole globe will be shut. A lot of single screens will struggle. Uh, Also, not only single screens, but the smaller chains which have 30 screens or 40 screens, they would also find it very difficult to sustain.
Hi, Kamal. Thank you so much for joining us. These are
Thanks for having me.
these are totally unprecedented times. Kamal, you said to me on text message that 95% of the theaters in the world are shut right now. PVR had 845 screens. It's the biggest chain in the country. How are you handling this right now?
You're right. These are tough times, unprecedented situation. No one saw this coming. As we speak, 845 screens all over the country, almost 70 odd cities, PVR has taken a shutdown. We were, as a measure of precaution, governments issued, this is a state issue. Cinema, as you know, is a state issue. So all the state governments had come out with an advisory. Since 13th March, is when the advisories started coming in, and within 2 or 3 days, pretty much in all states, we had to take a shutdown. Uh, so that's for India. Every cinema chain is shut down. We are part of a Global Cinema Federation, which is an association of all associations. And, there was a recent call, which is, and I was texting you when we were messaging, I was talking about that call that, on that call, we had exhibitors from China who incidentally had recently opened about 5% of their chain. But then yesterday, I saw it in the news that even those 5% cinemas have been told to shut down again because I think they're experiencing another wave of virus. So as a measure of precaution, they've again gone in for shutdown. So all cinemas are shut down again in China. US, everything is shut down. So basically in the world except Japan, which shut 2 days back, and Indonesia, which is still operational, every single cinema chain is shut. Uh, this is uh, this is a situation no one expected would ever happen, let alone India, that the whole globe will be shut and every single cinema chain, all shootings, every film that we had a very strong lineup of local films, Suryavanshi, which was releasing in March, 83 in April, Bond in April, everything is delayed. So that's what the situation is. The government has told us that uh, uh, till mid-April is when the cinemas should remain shut. But uh, obviously, a lot will depend on how this whole lockdown period unfolds and how many more cases come out. But our sense is that cinemas, even if lockdown is lifted on 15th April, cinemas are most likely to remain shut till end April or maybe mid-May. Uh, so that's the way we are looking at the situation. Yeah.
I was reading an interview with the head of the Theatre Owners Association in America, and he said that it's the first time in the 100-year history of cinema that the box office is zero. It's never happened, through wars, through recessions, through everything. Movies have held us. This collective experience of the theater has held us. You were talking about China, Kamal. Even when those theaters did open, uh, I saw a report in Variety magazine which said that the average box office take was so low that it came up to one person in each theater. So there's obviously also a great fear. What is your sense of what happens when the cinemas do open? Do you think people will just rush because we're all just dying to get back to the big screen experience, or your sense is that people will be afraid and wary for some time?
To be honest, like the conversation you referred, we are also experiencing it for the first time. I've been in business for 25 years and we've experienced multiple crises, but this is a unique crisis where every single cinema is shut. Uh, China, the number one problem they had, this is I'm sort of paraphrasing what the exhibitors told us on the call. The number one problem that they have today is that they don't have new releases.
Right.
They don't have new releases from the local industry. There is no clarity from the Hollywood studios. Uh, and of course, there is this whole element of, people are skeptical to come back to cinema so soon. So obviously, they will take time to warm up. Uh, but this, this recovery phase, if we could call it that, can be expedited if studios start releasing new films. That's the message we got from the Chinese exhibitors. In fact, interestingly, Mexico has had a similar situation way back in 2010 when, because of swine flu, cinemas in Mexico had to take a shutdown for 10 days, much smaller duration, but similar panic situation. Uh, and similar apprehension once the cinemas opened. They took about 4 weeks to come back to normal. And again, there the problem was studios were not willing to sort of release their big films initially, and it took a lot of discussion and persuasion to get the cinemas to get the studios to release the film. But once the film started releasing, people started coming back, and within 2-3 weeks of new releases taking place, people started coming back. So our sense, based on these experiences that we're hearing from China and Mexico and other countries, a recovery period in India would also be 4 to 6 weeks. I think it'll be critical how producers come out and support, uh, as and when cinemas are allowed to open, and if they are quick with their releases, which I think they would be, because uh, studios tend to have a different point of view on these things, and independent producers look at these things a lot more differently.
Yeah.
Our sense is that Indian producers would be eager to use this as an opportunity, because people would be away from cinemas for, depending on when we open, a minimum of 4 to maybe 8 weeks. And that's a big period. Cinema going as a habit, there'll be a lot of pent-up demand. So a lot of producers will also see it as an opportunity. But in our mind, we are thinking 4 to 5 weeks is what it'll take us to come back to normal.
But Kamal, tell me, what is the human cost of this? I saw an interview that Ajay Bijli, and he talked about how PVR does have the reserves to sort of get by this crisis, though everyone's taken pay cuts down the food chain. What happens to the standalone theaters? What happens to the single screens? What do you see panning out now?
So firstly, in case of PVR, the salary cut is restricted to middle and the senior level management. The frontliners have been protected from the salary cut. We are also taking this situation on month basis. Uh, so, at least at this point in time, there have been no salary cuts at the lower level, at the frontline level of PVR. Uh, Coming back to your question, tough situation. I mean, depends really. India is a very fragmented market. There are easily 5.5 to 6,000 single screens. Uh, you know, uh, Most of them have fragmented ownerships. I mean, one owner would typically have one or maybe two or three cinemas. Depending on their ability to sustain this crisis and withstand the fixed cost pressure. Cinema is a very high fixed cost business. So depending on individual capacity, I think you would see, and depending on how long it takes for cinemas to open, our sense is a lot of single screens will struggle. Uh, Also, not only single screens, but the smaller
Yeah.
chains which have 30 screens or 40 screens, they would also find it very difficult to sustain. Uh, uh, PVR, fortunately, we have the reputation, banking relationships. Recently in February, we had done some equity raise. So as a result of that, we have a reasonable amount of liquidity. And if the situation warrants, we can go to our bankers, raise some more funds. But our sense is lot of smaller chains will struggle to get funds, and they would definitely not have the wherewithal to sustain this beyond 4 to 5 weeks. So uh, I think a lot of people would be in trouble. That's our sense.
Tell me, do you see the window between theatrical and streaming getting shorter because of this?
Early to say, but personally, I don't think there would be an impact. We've been in touch with all our studio partners, Indian film business producer partners. Uh, Producers are extremely confident about theatrical platform. Unlike US, which is a saturated market, and US also there is a great deal of dependence on theatrical circuit from revenue mix point of view. I mean, you cannot ignore, especially for bigger films, it's difficult to make the economics work for a film without adding the revenue from the theatrical
Yeah,
segment.
yeah,
In India, more so, the dependence and also the fact that cinema chains have been growing by about 10 to 15% year on year. India is a growth market. Producers are extremely confident. And even in this period, which is where we can't fault a producer for reducing windows. I mean, if they would want to, we would be very supportive of it. But even in this period, so far, none of the producers have reduced the window. They've all maintained that 8-week window for television and OTT, and for pay-per-view, the 6-week window. Our sense is this is a temporary phenomena. Even if some people, some producers reduce the window, go to broadcasters or OTT earlier than the 8-week window, uh, it would only be because of the uniqueness of situation. It could only be because cinemas are not operational, and we can't fault them for trying to mitigate the risk and trying to make the most of this opportunity. Because for OTT, this is an opportunity, right?
of course
Everyone
it
is
is.
at home.
Of course it
So
is.
for them, it's a big opportunity.
Yeah.
But no, I think in the long run, we'll be back to the normal windows. That's our sense.
But tell me, Kamal, my concern is really for the mid-level film, for the small level film. You know, as it is, those films had such a hard time bringing patrons into theaters. What happens now? Are we going to see a market that's even more skewed, that it's only the tent pole or nothing?
But if you look at the last 2.5 years, the mid-range films have done exceedingly well. I mean, Ayushmann Khurrana has become the new superstar of mid-range
Sure,
films.
but does this change that kind of curve?
I mean, this is my thought, and time will tell whether our sense and our thoughts are correct or incorrect. But our sense is that people would come back, uh, uh, with we would see occupancies in the remaining half of this financial year, as in when we open, which we have not seen before.
Right.
The reason I say this is because we've had a similar situation, a different type of a crisis, but there was this, commercial dispute in 2009 when producers had stopped releasing new films for almost 45 days, 50 days. And uh, when films started coming, the kind of occupancies that we saw in cinemas were unprecedented. Uh, well, I mean, this crisis is very different from that crisis. I acknowledge that. But we've also had situations where Bombay, Mumbai now, and many other parts of the country have unfortunately been victim of terrorist attacks.
Yeah.
Delhi and Mumbai, we had some really, situations which created a lot of panic. But within less than a week, people were back to cinemas, life was back to normal. So I guess this whole social nature, which makes the virus so deadly, is also in a way the strength of out of home business. We're all social beings and we want to go out, and it's very difficult to change these habits.
Yeah. Yeah.
So our sense is people would be back to cinemas fairly quickly as soon as producers start releasing films, and we will see occupancies that we've not seen before.
Okay, speaking of which, last question. Do you think there's going to be a bloodbath when the theaters do reopen, because dates का इतना लफड़ा वैसे भी होता है कि किसकी date है, which film releases. What happens when you haven't had a movie in the theater for 6 weeks or 2 months? How do the small guys survive?
Fair point है. और I go back to the 2009 crisis. Producers ने साथ में बैठ के across the table associations की help से release dates को sort out किया था. थोड़ा बहुत cannibalization, some bit of bloodbath will happen. There is no doubt of that. But also at the same point, we have to now recognize that we have more screens than what we had earlier.
Yeah.
You know, this releasing 2 films on big holidays, big weeks has become the norm. You know, this releasing another film with Salman Khan's film on Eid used to be like a sure shot suicide, but not anymore. Producers are coming out releasing Diwali pe 2 films aa rahi hain, Christmas pe 2 hai. You know, so all holidays, the norm is becoming 2 and sometimes more than 2 films. When I say 2, I mean 2 of same language, and then you'll have some Tamil film, some Telugu film, maybe one Hollywood film. I think we have the screens to now absorb multiple films at the same time. But that said, issues honge, but I think there is a lot of money riding these films, and producers are extremely experienced. We have a lot of experience in these matters, and I think people would sit down and figure out a way to deal with this dating release scheduling issue. I won't say amicably, but we'll figure out a way to sort of
You're
manage
too
this.
seasoned to say amicably. I hope so, Kamal. I hope so. I really just, I only have to say that I spent every Friday, every Thursday in a movie theater, mostly at PVR Juhu, and I really miss it. So I'm really hoping that the world comes back to normal and we are back doing what we do. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for saying that, and good luck to all of us.
Thank you.